What's up, everybody? It's Josh coming at you from Nerd Adventures Tower. I want to talk about Star Wars and why I think Star Wars desperately needs new stories, new content, and it really needs to stop relying on nostalgia and going back in time to visit legacy characters. I want to start this video by talking about all of the pitfalls and all of the undeniable friction and conflict that Lucasfilm is going to find themselves in if they keep doing this. And then I want to talk about recent comments that Taika Waititi made about his Star Wars movie and the most recent comments about Kevin Feige's Star Wars movie, because both of those films seem to be fresh, new, and going in a new direction with new characters, which I think is fantastic. But let's begin by talking about legacy characters and why Lucasfilm needs to stop going back to that old well. First up, if you look at Lucasfilm's track record with legacy characters, you're going to find a pretty mixed bag from a lot of different Star Wars fans out there, and I think that's putting it nicely. Like, a lot of fans have huge problems with how the character of Luke Skywalker was treated in the sequel trilogy, but even a character like Han Solo is treated poorly, in my opinion. And we don't need to retread all of that, because I think that's pretty well documented how a lot of fans feel about that. And even if you are one of the fans out there that has no problem with Han Solo in the sequel trilogy or Luke Skywalker, I think you'd have to admit there are a lot of fans that do. Even if you don't agree with it, you can look out into the fandom and see it, man. It's obvious. A lot of folks have a lot of problems with these characters, and I think maybe the worst one from the sequel trilogy was actually Palpatine. Palpatine's plan and his motivations in Episode 9 make little to no sense whatsoever, and this is after the prequels did an incredible job of getting us to know Palpatine, understand the level of his machinations, and why he's ultimately so freaking awesome and becomes the emperor of the entire galaxy. And this is a pretty basic problem. The problem is you have a lot of writers and storytellers wanting to do interesting, intriguing story things, but there's already this pre-established lore and canon and basic sentiment for these different characters. There was this moment in an interview where Mark Hamill was talking about Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, and he said that at some point he kept coming up to Ryan and saying, like, we've got to think about the fans. We have to think about how the fans are going to feel about these different things. And Ryan literally told him no. He said, we don't have to think about the fans. We have to think about our own story. But that's the problem. I don't think either one of those things are exactly right. I think you actually need a perfect combination of both. And I can totally see both sides of this argument. Like, on the one hand, if you just stick to the characters and the characterizations that fans are comfortable with those characters, you do stifle creativity and you put railroads on a story. But on the other hand, if you go unabated and do not care about how fans feel about these different characters or the characterizations that were set up by the prior lore, then you're so drastically different than those characterizations, you're inevitably going to create some pissed off fans. And so it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. And in some ways, even though I think the sequel trilogy could have been way better, it was almost always going to be divisive in my mind. You can't take iconic and legendary characters and do them again in the future and service both of those wants and needs. How do we make fans feel like this is the same character that I had before, while also feel like the story and the narrative of what they're watching is new and fresh? It is an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk. And to be fair, I do think that shows like Cobra Kai and a movie like Top Gun Maverick do sort of show the right way to do this. And unfortunately, it does kind of mean you kill a lot of the creativity and you just go back to the nostalgia. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason Cobra Kai works is because it is a lot of the same characters and tropes that we loved from the OG Cobra Kai. And Cobra Kai isn't this intricate, well-woven story or plot. It's familiar characters doing familiar things, a ton of nostalgia, sweet fighting, a lot of humor. It doesn't try to take itself too seriously. It understands that the Cobra Kai movies or the Karate Kid movies were just loved because they were coming-of-age stories with interesting characters and martial arts themes. And so it's a real reprint of what came before. And although, yeah, Cobra Kai does some interesting things, some of the plot stuff is really fun and the characters are great, it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not trying to be the most creative, awe-inspiring, unbelievable thing. It's just being more Karate Kid. And that's the same thing with Top Gun Maverick. Like, I love Top Gun Maverick. It's a super fun movie, but it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel either. It doesn't try to deconstruct its main character. It just gives you more of what you're looking for. You're looking for Top Gun type movies about this crazy Maverick character trying to fit into a world that doesn't accept him and, fighting beyond limits and all these crazy jet plane type moments, adrenaline, action, and over the top stuff. I mean, that's what you're going to get in a Top Gun movie. I think Book of Boba Fett is a really good example of like doing this the exact wrong way. Like, instead of just giving us more bounty hunter Boba Fett and he's just being a badass throughout the galaxy, they did humanize him. They took him through a whole arc with a tribe where he learns new things, has respect, feels a new family, wants to look out for his own crime family, wants to now be a crime boss, and all of these different things. And at some level, this is acceptable because it's creative and they want to take the character in a new and different direction, but it leaves behind a lot of the identity and the connection that fans had to that character. And when people say phrases like bait and switch, I think what they're really saying is you used the character's nostalgia and how I felt about this character to bring me to the show, and the show itself does not deliver on the promise of doing a show about this character that I had all these feelings and attachment to. You took Boba in a wildly different direction, and for a lot of fans, that just simply didn't work. Now, we're not completely finished with the Kenobi show. As I'm recording and releasing this video, we are done with episode 5 and looking forward to episode 6, but Kenobi suffers from different problems than the Book of Boba Fett and illustrates another perfect reason why going back to these nostalgic characters is very, very tricky. You see, in the Kenobi show, they're doing all sorts of rubbing up against canon, retconning different ideas that we had about the pre-established lore, and they're going back to not just characters that are really important to Star Wars, but characters that have a plethora of content that exists before this show and a plethora of content that exists after this show. And it's not just the movies, it's books, it's Rebels, it's Clone Wars. A lot of stuff has been established with these two characters. And so the writers of the Kenobi show are presented with the damn near impossible task of taking characters in a time period that's really restricted and doing something interesting and engaging with these characters that feels true to the nostalgia, but also does enough compelling stuff so it must rub up against canon. And it's like a really weird balance that I personally do not think they are handling well. The characters, and especially after episode 5, do feel like the characters I know, but they're doing so much and interacting with so many other characters, like what they're doing with Leia and her knowing all sorts of stuff that I don't think she should have known about, what they might be doing with Luke, as we see at the end of episode 5. It all just feels really weird, and it conflicts with a lot of my feelings about the canon around that time. But I think maybe the main reason that I think Star Wars needs new and why they need to get past going back to other legacy characters and legacy time periods is because of the social contract that happens between Lucasfilm and your average consumer. Like, look, obviously, companies want to make money. Disney bought Star Wars to make money, and that's all well and good. And most Star Wars fans are more than happy to spend their money on Star Wars merchandise, on Star Wars product, on taking themselves to the movies to see Star Wars films, or having a Disney Plus subscription to continue to watch new Star Wars content. But it must feel like we are receiving an equivalent amount of love and care for the characters and the IP that was before them, something that we really engaged with now after they have bought it. Like, if Lucasfilm wants to keep making money off the Star Wars brand, Star Wars fans have to keep feeling that at some level, Star Wars is trying to give fans what they want and expand and enrich the time that they have in that universe. Like, when you go to Galaxy's Edge, you want to feel like you're just having the time of your life. As a Star Wars fan, you want to see Star Wars things, feel like you're living in that world. And this is all backed up by experiences that you have prior had with Star Wars, the time time you watched it with your dad or your mom way back in the day, the time you binged Clone Wars, like these different moments and ways that the IP has connected to you. But if it begins to feel like Disney is just putting out the bare minimum or not putting the love and care that they need to, then you're going to be more reluctant to spend your time and money on Star Wars stuff. And if it ever got to the point where it just felt like a cash grab, where it just felt like Disney was trying to put the Star Wars label on mid-tier to mediocre content and product, then you wouldn't feel good about that. And if that happened enough times, you would stop spending your time and money on Star Wars. And we are at this weird place with the Star Wars brand where the more they go back to nostalgia, the more they go back to these characters and also don't deliver it perfectly for fans, they are not following up on their end of that social contract. Like, I don't need every Star Wars product or show or character to feel like it's created specifically for me as a Star Wars fan. I understand that at this point, Star Wars is a lifestyle brand and it's massive with all kinds of fans that engage in the brand in different ways. But I need to feel like at least some of this content is made for me specifically as a Star Wars fan. And to me, doing new Star Wars content with new characters is one of the best ways to get away from that sort of fear that a lot of folks have about just over commercialization, because this would be pure creative and doing things in a way that would prove to me that they understand some of the formula of Star Wars, something of what makes it what it is, and gives me a whole new storyline with new characters that I can engage with. I don't have to worry about how these characters will affect the prior canon. I don't have to be constrained mentally by events that happen before and after the time period that I am in. I can just fully engage with this world, these characters, and so long as it feels Star Wars and it feels like it has a ton of love behind it, that's going to be very positive to me. And I think it could end up being very, very positive for a lot of fans that are kind of on the fence or in a weird place with Star Wars content, especially fans that are not loving how a lot of these legacy characters have been handled. And now I want to read for you some comments by Taika Waititi about his new Star Wars movie, which do give me hope that he's going to do some new and some fresh stuff. He says here, look, I think for the Star Wars universe to expand, it has to expand. I don't think that I'm any use in the Star Wars universe making a film where everybody's like, oh, great, well, that's the blueprint to the Millennium Falcon. Ah, that's Chewbacca's grandmother. That all stands alone. That's great. Though I would like to take something new and create some new characters and just expand the world. Otherwise, it feels like it's a very small story. And his comments sort of speak to one of the problems I illustrated earlier. By going back to these other things and relying too heavily on nostalgia, it confines the creativity. And a person like Taika, who is a creative force of nature, would be ill-served to go try to walk this weird tightrope of creating new, fresh, interesting content in a confined way. Like, oh, we're going to give you this time period right before this movie comes out and after this book comes out. It's like, nah, fam, that's not it. Allow this creative force to do his creative thing. At the end of the day, Star Wars began as a wild space opera saga from the pure imagination of a super big nerd named George Lucas. He had all these wild concepts and ideas, and even though it wasn't flawless along the way of its creation, it was very true to its own spirit and vision, and it enamored folks. Folks got into it, and I think that Taika needs to be given the chance to do the same thing, to not be confined by Star Wars and to do something freaking new. Now I want to read to you a couple of comments that Michael Waldron made about Star Wars. They're very similar to what Taika said, so let's take a look. Michael Waldron, who's the writer of Kevin Feige's Star Wars fan, when asked about the progress on his movie, he said it's coming along. It's nice to have some time to focus on it. And it is fun to get to do something that feels fresh and original. And I'm excited to get to work with Kevin again and with the team at Lucasfilm. And I love Star Wars, so it's a blast. I'm writing away, he continues. I'm enjoying having the freedom on that to do something that's not necessarily a sequel or anything. It maybe has a little bit less of a... It just doesn't have a bunch of TV shows and movies that you're servicing on top of it the way I had with Doctor Strange. So it's nice. It feels like a different exercise. And again, I think that's super cool and on point with the process. And it seems like a lot of the creatives behind Star Wars are looking for something new. And I'm not saying we can't go back to other characters and do some stuff like that, because I, for one, am excited for like Tales of the Jedi and filling in some of those gaps with Dave Filoni handling the young Qui-Gon and Dooku story, Ahsoka's family, and things like that. Of course, that kind of stuff is absolutely great. But I do think for Star Wars to expand, it does need to actually expand and do new. And I think Lucasfilm needs to prove to us that they can actually execute on what Star Wars is when it leaves behind a lot of that nostalgia, because frankly they haven't nailed that part of it for a lot of different fans. And I think doing something completely new and allowing creative forces just like young George was to come in and create the new palette, the new tapestry, the new story, I think it would be brilliant. It would sidestep a lot of these different issues, and I think it's something that Star Wars desperately needed. So I just kind of wanted to just go on this little blurb with you guys, talk about my issues with Lucasfilm handling nostalgia, and talk about the hope I have for Taika and Kevin's movies. I'm sure you have some thoughts about it, so let me know what you're thinking in the comments section below.